Today, we're looking at a list. It's kind of a surprising list of countries that have banned
Oh, yeah.
American travelers as of 2025. Yeah, 10 countries in total.
10 countries, yeah. It's a pretty diverse group.
It is. It is. When you look at the list, there's some that you might expect, but then there are some that are really going to make you scratch your head.
Yeah, you've got countries known for their historical sites, beautiful landscapes, some that were actually, pretty popular tourist destinations just a few years ago.
I know, right? It's really interesting. So what we're going to do in this deep dive is we're going to go through each country one by one, look at the reasons behind the travel bans, and also talk about what it means for both the U.S. and these countries moving forward.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how these bans play out in the long run, politically, economically, and culturally.
Definitely. A lot of layers to unpack here.
For sure.
So, should we just jump right in?
Let's do it.
Okay, well, speaking of countries that have become a lot more isolated in recent years, let's move on to Russia.
Oh, yeah, Russia!
Yeah, I mean, you think of Moscow, St. Petersburg, all that history and culture.
Right.
And now it's basically off limits to Americans.
Yeah, in 2024, they implemented a ban on U.S. tourists, citing political tensions and cyber attacks as the main reasons.
Which sadly isn't all that surprising given the current climate.
No, it really does feel like we're sliding back into Cold War era dynamics.
It's like one minute you're planning a trip to see the Hermitage Museum, and the next you're told, nope, not welcome here.
It really highlights how quickly things can change, how fragile those bridges between nations can be.
It makes you wonder, too, what the real motives are behind this ban. Is it purely about politics? Or is there also an element of trying to shield Russian citizens from Western influence?
That's a good question. I think it's probably a combination of both. They want to control the narrative, limit access to information that might challenge the government's viewpoint.
It's that control of information theme again, isn't it?
Seems to be a recurring pattern, unfortunately.
Let's move on to another country where that control of information is definitely at play. Iran.
Iran. Such a fascinating country. So much history, so much culture. But yeah, shrouded in political complexities.
In 2024, they also imposed a travel ban on Americans, citing espionage fears and ongoing political disputes.
Not entirely unexpected, given the historical tensions.
Right, but it's still a shame. I've heard from Americans who visited Iran before the ban that it was actually incredibly welcoming, which really contradicts the image we often see in the media.
It just goes to show how important it is to get firsthand accounts, to challenge those preconceived notions we might have.
Absolutely. Okay, so from a country that briefly opened up, let's move to one that's been struggling for a long time. Venezuela.
Yeah, Venezuela. It's a country with so much potential. I mean, it has the world's largest oil reserves.
I know, it's crazy.
But it's been in a state of economic decline for years, and it just keeps getting worse.
In 2024, they also banned American travelers, officially citing national security concerns, but it seems like there's a lot more to it than that. Well, let's shift our focus now to North Africa, to a country that's also been grappling with conflict and instability. Libya,
yeah. We often hear about the historical sites there, the Roman ruins, the Mediterranean coastline.
Right, but the reality is much harsher these days.
In 2024, they banned American travelers, citing national security and espionage risks. But the truth is, Libya is a country trying to rebuild after years of civil war.
It's a long road to recovery, and basic services are still a mess. Millions of people have been displaced, and the situation remains incredibly fragile.
The travel ban just adds another layer of isolation to a country that desperately needs support and engagement from the international community.
It's heartbreaking to think of a place with such a rich past, now struggling just to get back on its feet.
It really highlights the long-lasting effects of conflict, how it can ripple outward and impact so many aspects of life.
Well, unfortunately, that ripple effect is something we see again with our next destination, Yemen.
Oh, Yemen. It's a country that's often overlooked, but it has such a rich history and culture.
And now it's synonymous with war and suffering.
Yeah, in 2024, they banned American travelers, citing safety concerns and the potential to complicate the ongoing civil war, which is understandable.
Right. But the situation in Yemen goes far beyond just safety concerns. We're talking about a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Famine, disease, widespread displacement. Millions of people have been displaced, and the humanitarian crisis is staggering.
In 2024, Syria also banned American travelers, citing espionage and foreign interference. But the reality is, this is one of the worst humanitarian disasters in recent history.
And the travel ban makes it even harder to provide aid. to document the atrocities, to understand the full scope of the suffering.
It's a stark reminder of the devastating cost of conflict and how it can impact an entire generation.
For sure. But also as a way to control the narrative and limit outside scrutiny.
It's a tragedy for the people of Myanmar, who had hoped for a more democratic future, and it's a blow to those who wanted to experience the country's unique culture and beauty.
The travel ban makes it that much harder to monitor the situation, to support those who are resisting the military regime, and to hold those in power accountable.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always linear, and that even in the 21st century, freedom and democracy are fragile and constantly under threat.
It's a sobering thought, but it's also a call to action. We can't just stand by and watch as countries turn inward, as borders close, and as people are denied their basic rights.
We have a responsibility to speak out, to stay informed, and to support those who are fighting for a better future.
Well said. And I think that's a good place to pause for now. Tourism can be this amazing way for people from different backgrounds to connect, to share ideas, to learn from each other.
Exactly. It's this incredible force for cultural exchange, building understanding, breaking down stereotypes.
And when you close off those avenues, it's not just about Americans missing out on seeing these places. It's about those countries losing that opportunity to share their stories, their traditions with the world.
It's a two-way street. And when you put up a roadblock, everyone loses out.
So how does all this play out in terms of diplomacy? I imagine it can't be good for countries that are already at odds with each other.
You're absolutely right. Diplomacy relies on communication, on building relationships.
Right.
And travel restrictions make that so much harder. When diplomats can't travel freely between countries, when there are all these barriers in place, it creates this atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust.
It's like trying to have a conversation through a brick wall.
Exactly. And that makes it so much harder to negotiate, to resolve conflicts, to find common ground.
And then there's the economic impact. These countries are losing out on a major source of revenue, right?
Absolutely. Tourism brings in billions of dollars worldwide.
Wow.
And for some countries, especially developing nations, tourism is a huge part of their economy.
Okay, so we've talked about the downsides.
Yeah.
But are there any potential benefits to these travel restrictions? Or maybe some unintended consequences that could actually be positive?
That's an interesting question. There are a few potential upsides. Some people argue that less tourism could give local communities and ecosystems a much-needed break from the constant influx of visitors.
That's true. I've seen firsthand how over-tourism can damage fragile environments.
Exactly. So maybe these travel bans, even though they're not ideal, could give some destinations a chance to reset, to figure out more sustainable ways to manage tourism in the future.
But I have to ask, are there ways for Americans to still experience these cultures, to connect with people from these countries, even with these barriers in place?
That's a great question, and it really speaks to our human desire to learn, to connect, to explore, even when things are tough.
It's true. We don't want to just give up and say, oh, guess I'll never see that part of the world.
Exactly. And the good news is we don't have to. Technology can play a huge role here.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, we have access to so much information online these days. Articles, documentaries, virtual tours, you name it, it's all at our fingertips.
It's amazing how much you can learn about a place without even setting foot there.
Right.